On a summer night in 1998, 26-year-old Tony Imondi climbed into his 1996 Ford Ranger and drove off into the quiet roads of Berlin, New Hampshire. He was young, healthy, and had his whole life ahead of him. But that night, Tony vanished. His truck was gone. He was gone. And for nearly 20 years, no one could explain how a man could disappear so completely, leaving not a single trace behind. His family searched endlessly, haunted by questions with no answers, living in the torment of not knowing whether Tony was alive or gone forever. Then, in 2017, the Androscoggin River gave up its secret. Hidden beneath the dark waters was Tony's missing Ford Ranger, and inside were human remains. Was this the tragic result of an accident, or was something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of that night? Stay with me as we journey into one of New Hampshire's most haunting mysteries. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more unsolved stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps keep these forgotten cases alive. Tony's life and disappearance. In the late 1990s, Berlin, New Hampshire, was the kind of town where people still left their doors unlocked at night. Nestled against the Androscoggin River, it was a place defined by its forests, its mills, and its sense of community. Life moved at a steady pace. And in 1998, few would have imagined that this quiet town would become the setting for a mystery that still lingers to this day. At the center of the story was Tony Imondi, a 26-year-old man known by friends and family simply as Tony. To those who knew him, he wasn't just another face in town. He was a son, a brother, a friend. Tony had a reputation for being responsible, dependable, and kind-hearted. He wasn't the type of person who stirred up trouble or lived recklessly. Instead, he was grounded, a young man just beginning to carve out his path in life. Tony drove a 1996 Ford Ranger, a modest pickup truck that reflected his practical, hard-working nature. It was the kind of truck you'd see parked in small-town driveways across New England, a vehicle built to last, and in Tony's case, built to take him wherever he needed to go. On an otherwise ordinary evening in the summer of 1998, Tony climbed into that truck and drove off. It was supposed to be just another night. Nothing about his departure suggested that anything was wrong, but that drive would mark the beginning of a disappearance that would confound investigators and devastate his family for nearly 2 decades. When Tony failed to return home, worry set in quickly. His family knew his routines, his habits. He wasn't the type to vanish without explanation. Phone calls went unanswered, and hours of waiting turned into a night filled with dread. By the following morning, the alarm was raised. Tony was missing. The police began their work immediately, retracing Tony's last known steps. They checked with friends, co-workers, and acquaintances. Had he mentioned any plans? Was there someone he was supposed to meet that night? But no one could provide a clear answer. There were no arguments, no debts, no obvious reason for Tony to run away from his life. He had simply vanished. Attention quickly turned to the roads that snaked along the Androscoggin River. These routes were narrow, dark, and in some places, treacherous. Officers wondered if Tony might have lost control of his truck, sending it into the river's cold embrace. Search teams scoured the riverbanks, looking for any sign of tire marks, broken guardrails, or debris. Divers were sent into the water, their flashlights cutting through the murky depths. But the river gave nothing back. No oil slicks, no shattered glass, no sign of Tony's truck. The absence of evidence was maddening. For the Imondi family, each day without answers grew heavier. They plastered missing person posters across town, Tony's face staring out from every storefront window and telephone pole. They begged for information, hoping that someone, somewhere, had seen something that might explain where Tony had gone. But the town had no answers. Rumors spread, as they often do in small communities. Some whispered that Tony might have simply chosen to leave, to start over somewhere else. Others suspected that something darker had happened, that foul play was involved. Still others clung to the hope that perhaps Tony was alive, out there somewhere, waiting to be found. None of the theories made sense. Tony wasn't a man who left things unfinished. He wasn't the kind of person who would abandon his family without a word. His disappearance was not just unexpected, it was unexplainable. Weeks turned into months. The initial search efforts slowed, though the Imondi family refused to give up. They pleaded for more attention, more resources, but as time passed, the case grew colder. For Berlin, the mystery was unsettling. This wasn't a town accustomed to sudden vanishings. To lose someone so young, with no explanation, left a shadow over the community. People locked their doors more often. Parents kept a closer eye on their children. And always, the river flowed silently through town, as if it knew the secret that no one else could uncover. By the end of 1998, the investigation had stalled. Police had no leads, no suspects, and no evidence to pursue. Tony Imondi and his 1996 Ford Ranger had simply disappeared into thin air. For his family, the pain was immeasurable. Every holiday, every birthday, came with an empty chair and unanswered questions. They lived in limbo, torn between the faint hope that Tony might still be alive and the crushing fear that he was gone forever. What haunted them most was the silence. A man does not simply vanish without a trace, and yet, in Tony's case, that was exactly what seemed to have happened. It would take nearly 2 decades before the Androscoggin River, quiet, steady, and indifferent, finally revealed the truth it had been hiding. But in 1998, no one could have imagined how deeply this mystery would burrow into the heart of Berlin, or how long it would take for even a fragment of an answer to surface. The search and the long silence. The disappearance of Tony Imondi shook Berlin, New Hampshire, to its core. In the days and weeks after he vanished, the town was alive with urgency. Police cruisers prowled the narrow roads at all hours. Search parties trudged through the dense woods, and divers descended into the Androscoggin River, hoping for a clue, any clue, that might explain what happened to the 26-year-old. At first, there was optimism. After all, when a man disappears with his vehicle, there should be a trail. Vehicles don't evaporate. They leave behind skid marks, dents in guardrails, or at the very least, pieces of shattered glass. But as the days passed, investigators found nothing. It was as though Tony and his Ford Ranger had been swallowed whole by the earth. For Tony's family, those first months were unbearable. His parents clung to the phone, dreading silence yet praying for a call. His siblings retraced his usual routes, driving along the same roads he once traveled, pulling over at every ditch and embankment, scanning for any sign of twisted metal or broken branches. Each dead end only deepened the void. Search dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled overhead. Law enforcement checked local hotels, bus stations, and even nearby airports, in case Tony had left on his own. But time and again, the answer was the same. No trace, no leads, no progress. As weeks turned into months, the community itself became an extension of the search. Neighbors knocked on doors, asking questions. Flyers remained taped to gas pumps and grocery store windows long after their colors had begun to fade. Strangers approached the family with rumors, theories, or alleged sightings, but nothing solid ever materialized. And then came the silence. By the end of the first year, the case had grown cold. The urgency that once filled the town began to dissipate. Police shifted their focus to other pressing matters. Volunteers returned to their lives. The posters curled at the edges, their ink running in the rain, until they were little more than ghosts of a man the town couldn't forget. For Tony's family, however, there was no moving on. Every holiday was a reminder of absence. Every birthday passed with an empty chair at the table. His mother kept his room intact, as though he might walk back through the door at any moment. His father drove the back roads in silence, scanning the riverbanks again and again, desperate for answers that never came. Theories filled the void that facts could not. Some whispered that Tony had driven into the river on that fateful night, his truck sinking into the depths where no diver could reach. Others suspected foul play, an accident covered up, or worse, a deliberate act of violence. And still, there were those who clung to the fragile hope that Tony had chosen to disappear, that he was alive somewhere, starting a new life beyond the reach of Berlin. The human mind, when faced with uncertainty, creates stories to survive. But for the Imondi family, each theory brought as much pain as comfort. If Tony had drowned, why couldn't they recover him? If foul play was involved, why were there no suspects? And if he had chosen to leave, why would he abandon the people who loved him most? The silence stretched on. Years turned into decades. The late 1990s became the early 2000s, and still no trace of Tony or his Ford Ranger surfaced. His case grew dusty in police files, marked as unsolved but rarely revisited. Technology advanced, cell phones, GPS tracking, DNA analysis, but none of it seemed to bring the Imondi family closer to the truth. Yet even as the world moved forward, the pain of uncertainty never left them. A missing loved one creates a wound that never heals. Death brings closure, however painful. But disappearance? Disappearance is a life sentence of unanswered questions. For nearly 20 years, the Androscoggin River continued to flow, carrying with it the secrets it refused to surrender. Families walked its banks, fishermen cast their lines into its depths, and the community lived alongside it, never suspecting that just beneath the surface, the river held the very truth that so many had longed for. It would not be until 2017, 19 long years after Tony vanished, that the silence would finally break, and the river would at last reveal what it had been hiding all along. The discovery in 2017. For nearly 2 decades, the mystery of Tony Imondi's disappearance remained frozen in time. His family aged, his friends moved on with their lives, and the town of Berlin adjusted to carrying an unsolved wound. Tony's name became something spoken with quiet sadness, never forgotten, but always unanswered. Then, in 2017, the silence was finally broken. On an ordinary day, a dive team working along the Androscoggin River made an unexpected discovery. The river had given up countless objects over the years: debris, discarded machinery, even abandoned vehicles. But this time, what they found was different. Submerged in the murky depths, coated in years of silt and algae, was a 1996 Ford Ranger pickup truck, the very make and model Tony had been driving on the night he vanished in 1998. Word of the discovery spread quickly. For those who had lived through the uncertainty of Tony's disappearance, the news was electric. Some felt hope, others felt dread. Could it be? After 19 years, had the mystery finally reached its conclusion? Authorities worked carefully to retrieve the truck. As heavy machinery lifted it from the water, the scene was both surreal and haunting. The Ford Ranger emerged slowly from the river, dripping and broken, its once shiny paint now dulled and eaten away by 2 decades beneath the surface. The vehicle that had carried Tony into oblivion was finally back in the daylight. But what lay inside would determine everything. When investigators searched the cab of the vehicle, they found human remains. Though the river had taken its toll, there was little doubt. This was Tony's truck, and the remains were believed to be his. After 19 years of torment, the Imondi family had the closest thing to an answer they had ever known. For Tony's parents, the discovery was a bittersweet moment. The years of agonizing uncertainty had finally ended. No longer would they have to wonder whether their son was alive or living somewhere far away. No longer would they spend holidays staring at the door, waiting for him to walk in. They had, at last, the beginnings of closure. Yet closure did not mean peace. Seeing Tony's truck pulled from the Androscoggin only raised more questions. How had no one found it sooner? Why had searchers in 1998, including divers and rescue teams, failed to locate it? Was the truck hidden in a part of the river that had been overlooked, or had it somehow shifted, only to be revealed years later? The discovery reignited speculation. Many leaned toward the simplest explanation: a tragic accident. Perhaps Tony had lost control on a dark road that night in 1998, plunging into the river where the current concealed his truck from view. But others were not so sure. How could an entire vehicle remain undetected for nearly 20 years, despite multiple searches of that very river? For law enforcement, the answers were frustratingly limited. With so much time having passed, crucial evidence had long since eroded. Water and time are merciless guardians of truth. What might have been clear in 1998 was now obscured, if not erased entirely. Yet despite the lingering questions, the Imondi family finally had something they had waited nearly 2 decades for, the chance to lay Tony to rest. His remains, recovered from the vehicle, were treated with dignity and returned to his family, ending 19 years of agonized waiting. The people of Berlin, too, felt the weight of the discovery. For so long, Tony's disappearance had been a scar on the community, a reminder of fragility, of how quickly life can vanish. When his truck surfaced, the entire town paused. People remembered where they were in 1998, remembered the search parties, the flyers, the rumors. And now, after 19 years, they had an answer, though not the one anyone had prayed for. But with the answer came a new unease. Closure is rarely clean. Some mysteries leave behind echoes, even when the surface truth is known. For many, the Androscoggin River itself became a symbol of that unease. Each ripple, each current, reminded them of what it had hidden for so long. The discovery of Tony's truck did not end the story. In many ways, it only shifted it from the torment of not knowing to the haunting realization of what had been missed. The river had always known the truth. The town, the family, and the investigators had simply been too late to uncover it. And yet, even in tragedy, there is a strange comfort. After 19 years of darkness, Tony was no longer lost. His story had not ended in silence, but in revelation, the Androscoggin, at last, had spoken. Theories, speculation, and lingering questions. The discovery of Tony Imondi's truck in the Androscoggin River in 2017 should have been the end of the story. But instead, it opened the door to a new set of questions. Questions that lingered over Berlin like a heavy fog. Closure, people quickly realized, did not mean clarity. For some, the explanation was straightforward. Tony had suffered a tragic accident. The late 1990s were a different time. Cell phones were rare. GPS navigation was virtually non-existent, and driving at night along winding rural roads could be dangerous. Perhaps Tony lost control of his Ford Ranger, veered off the road, and plunged into the river. If so, his death was a heartbreaking accident, and the 19 years of searching were nothing more than a cruel twist of fate. But for others, that answer felt far too simple. One of the first questions raised was this: how could an entire vehicle, a full-sized pickup truck, go unnoticed for nearly 2 decades? Search teams had combed the river back in 1998 using divers and sonar. How had they missed it? Was the truck hidden in a section too deep or too murky to see? Or was it possible that it hadn't been there all along, that it had somehow entered the river later? This line of thought gave rise to darker theories. Some speculated that Tony's disappearance was no accident at all. Perhaps he had been the victim of foul play, someone who had reason to silence him permanently. In this theory, the truck wasn't lost by chance but deliberately hidden, either driven or pushed into the water. 19 years was enough time for secrets to calcify, for those involved to move on, believing the truth would never resurface. And yet, there was never any evidence to support such a claim. No witnesses, no signs of violence, just a truck at the bottom of a river. Another theory, though less popular, was that Tony had chosen to vanish. The pressures of adulthood, financial strain, or private struggles might have driven him to escape, to leave Berlin behind and start anew. In that scenario, his truck in the river was either a symbolic act or an accident that occurred as he attempted to disappear. But Tony's family vehemently rejected this idea. He had been close to them, with no history of wanting to run away. To them, the thought that he would abandon his parents, siblings, and community without a word was unthinkable. Still, uncertainty feeds speculation. Over late-night conversations in Berlin diners, people whispered about the what-ifs. Some even claimed that the Androscoggin had been hiding more than just Tony's truck, that perhaps others had gone missing in its waters, their stories untold. For the Imondi family, the theories were both a comfort and a torment. On one hand, they wanted answers. On the other, every theory seemed to twist the knife of grief deeper. If Tony's death had been an accident, then it was tragically meaningless. 19 years stolen by bad luck and geography. But if foul play had been involved, then there was someone out there who knew the truth. Someone who had walked free for decades while the family suffered in silence. Law enforcement, for their part, remained cautious. By 2017, the evidence was simply too degraded to draw firm conclusions. The truck's condition offered few clues. The river had scoured it clean of most details, erasing fingerprints, fibers, or any trace that might have explained how it ended up there. Even the human remains inside were too far gone for definitive answers beyond identification. And so, the official line remained frustratingly vague. Tony Imondi's truck and presumed remains had been recovered, but the exact circumstances of his death were undetermined. Accident? Suicide? Homicide? The case file offered no final word. In a sense, this lack of certainty kept Tony's story alive. People are drawn to mystery, and the unanswered questions only fueled the fascination. True crime enthusiasts, amateur sleuths, and local storytellers all speculated about what really happened on that night in 1998. Each theory added another layer to a story that had already haunted the community for decades. But for those closest to Tony, speculation was hollow. His parents, elderly by the time the truck was found, no longer cared about theories or what-ifs. They wanted peace. They wanted their son remembered, not for the way he disappeared, but for the life he had lived, his laughter, his friendships, his small-town dreams. And yet, peace was hard to come by. Because no matter how many explanations people offered, the truth was known only to the Androscoggin River itself. And the river, for 19 years, had proven it could keep a secret. Legacy, impact and reflection. The discovery of Tony Imondi's truck in the Androscoggin River closed one chapter, but left the story of his life and disappearance etched into the memory of New Hampshire forever. For nearly 2 decades, Tony's absence had been a wound that never healed. His family, friends, and community carried the burden of uncertainty every single day. When his truck was finally pulled from the murky depths in 2017, the truth seemed within reach. And yet, as so often happens in real life, closure did not bring clarity. For Tony's family, the years of waiting had already changed them. His parents grew older with the grief of not knowing, each birthday and holiday serving as a reminder of his absence. By the time his remains were recovered, they were no longer searching for explanations. They simply longed for a chance to say goodbye. They buried Tony quietly, surrounded by those who had kept his memory alive through the years of silence. Though their questions lingered, they found a measure of peace in finally having a place to mourn. The impact on Berlin, New Hampshire, stretched far beyond the Imondi family. In small towns, tragedy ripples outward, touching neighbors, co-workers, even strangers who once saw Tony at the local gas station or grocery store. For 19 years, his disappearance became a story people told one another, a cautionary tale of how quickly life could change. The recovery of his truck did not erase that, it cemented it. What makes Tony's case resonate is not just the mystery, but the humanity at its core. He was not a headline or a statistic. He was a son, a brother, a friend. He had dreams, flaws, and everyday routines. When he vanished, the hole he left behind was not just a puzzle to solve, but a wound carried by real people who loved him deeply. That, perhaps, is the cruelest part of unsolved or unexplained disappearances, the way they transform ordinary families into lifelong investigators, searching for answers that may never come. As we reflect on Tony's story, it also reminds us of the fragility of certainty. How many other families are waiting, right now, for news of their missing loved ones? How many rivers, lakes, and forgotten backroads hold secrets still unseen? The Imondi family waited 19 years before the water gave up its truth. Others may never receive even that. And yet, remembering Tony ensures that his life was not defined solely by his disappearance. His laughter, his relationships, his place in his community, those remain. Sharing his story means honoring not just the mystery, but the man himself. For those of us who are drawn to unsolved cases, Tony's disappearance is a sobering reminder. Behind every headline is a family that waits by the phone. Behind every mystery is an empty chair at the dinner table. And behind every recovered car, every found photograph, is a life interrupted. The Androscoggin River kept its secret for 19 years. When it finally revealed Tony's Ford Ranger, it returned not only a truck, but decades of sorrow, speculation, and fragile hope. Perhaps we will never know exactly what happened on that night in 1998. But in telling his story, we keep alive the memory of a young man whose life mattered, and still matters. So, as we close this chapter, let us not think of Tony only as the man who vanished, but as the man who lived. And may his story serve as a call to cherish those we love, to hold them close, and to never take for granted the time we are given. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more haunting true crime mysteries, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep the memory of people like Tony alive and ensures that their stories are never forgotten.